everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're here joining us live, comment in the chat box and say hi. If you're new here, I'm Vanessa. I'm a fantasy, paranormal, and horror writer and book publisher and diversity reader. And on my channel, I talk about books, writing, and all things related to storytelling. And today's live stream is part of my monthly Writing Diversity series, which is a series I created to help writers learn how to write diverse characters. So for today's live stream, I'm chatting with poet and rapper Sean Avery Medlin. And today we're going to be talking about writing queer BIPOC characters. So Sean, do you want to say hi and give a brief introduction to yourself?
Yeah, hey everyone, my name is Sean. I'm really excited to be here with Vanessa on Vanessa Marie Books. As she said, I'm a poet and a rapper. I was very blessed to have my debut collection of poetry and essays published on September 21st of 2021, 808s and Other Worlds. That book is available anywhere books are sold. And I also am a musician. I have music on Spotify, all streaming. My last EP, I Never Left, and my debut album from 2018, Skinny Black, which is also a play. Um, yeah, I make things here in Phoenix and very fortunate to have people pay attention to them.
Awesome, cool. Um, and I see some people here are joining us live. We have Divi Phone. I hope I'm saying that right. But hi, glad you're here joining us. So, before we get started, if you've been on my channel before, if you've seen uh, the Writing Diversity series before, you know that I always start with a quick disclaimer. Um, so I just want to remind everyone watching that no group is a monolith. So Sean is here graciously sharing with us their experience as someone who is queer and BIPOC. And hopefully this will help other writers out there as well. But keep in mind that their experiences do not represent everyone who is queer and or BIPOC. So always make sure you do your research well and you get sensitivity readers for your stories. So with that said, we'll just dive right in. Um, so the first question I have here is, so there's a lot of misconceptions and misunderstandings in society about what non-binary is. So can you share with us what it means for you to identify as someone who is non-binary and what led you to discover this part of your identity?
Yes, thank you for that question. And what a way to start it off. I came out as non-binary in, I wanted to say maybe 2017. Um, it's something that I had been thinking about for a couple of years prior. I discovered that term when I was younger doing undergrad, and I was really searching for language to express what I was feeling. And I was talking to someone who let me know that the feelings I was expressing seemed to be more about um, gender than they were about sexuality. And I had to think about that for a while and what that meant for me and what I wanted my gender presentation and identity and expression to be. Um, so when I came out as non-binary, for me, it's a uh, creating a space for me that I don't have to choose between um, an either or, um, like, just incredibly violent and limiting idea of like how I can present myself and how I can be received and how I can even imagine myself. Um, and there was something else that I wanted to say. Um, it's also for me heavily tied to my racial identity. Being Black. Um, there's a way in which Black folks seem to historically exist outside of the gender binary as set by like a very white Western heteronormative patriarchy. Um, and with that in mind, I feel that Black people as a whole are oftentimes um, discredited uh, in their gender identity or denied parts of their gender identity or taken advantage of parts of their gender identity. So much so that I feel like living as a Black person in the US is its own sort of gender experience, separate from, um, you know, how other folks experience it who are not Black or even more specifically, dark skinned Black folks. Um, So yeah, that was a long answer, but um, yeah, I feel confident that identifying as non-binary gives me some power back.
Hmm. Cool. Um, I wanted to touch on when you just said uh, you felt like it tied into your racial identity and how you see um, the Black community as more than just the binary, the two binaries that we have. Can you share more about that? And like, do you have any examples of like what you think, uh, like, what makes you see the different, uh, what's different gender identities more than the binaries that are there? Are there examples that you've seen that makes you think that?
Yeah. So I think about there's a lot of things that I feel like kind of all connect for me that help me arrive to that point. I think about a pre-colonial Africa. I think about pre-colonial West Africa, and we are talking about dozens of different ethnic groups and tribes and communities and people, but amongst that large swath of people, there was a lot of, for lack of a better word, gender diversity. There was, you know, uh, uh, there's a book titled African Boy Wives and Girl Husbands. It's it's co-written, so I can't remember the name of the authors right now. But if anyone's watching and interested, I'm sure you can find it with just a Google search of African boy wives and girl husbands. But that text talks a lot about the gender diversity amongst ancient Africa. Um, and then I also think about the ways, again, tracing the transatlantic slave trade and sort of that that really deep trauma. Um, once African people arrived in the U.S. under bondage, there were so many ways that they were denied or taken advantage of their gender and their just not having autonomy and control over their own sex biologically, as well as not being able to choose how or if they have a gender identity, and being confined to the social role of the slave with no rights or no ability to read, all these ways in which gender became almost a um, nothing more but another tool of violence used against Black folks um, early here in the US. Um, Another thing that I think about is how often um, after the emancipation of slavery, the gender of the Black person in America, it was like marketed and propagated to have certain qualities or features. So the way that media over hundreds of years at this point has created gender caricatures for Black folks, and the way that Black folks contest and push back and live with these very heavy expectations upon our own gender expression and our own sexuality. Um, there is more that I want to say. Things are slipping my mind, but maybe to try and summarize all of that. Oh, were you going to say something? I'm sorry.
No, I said that's okay if things are slipping your mind. It happens to me all the time.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I think maybe just to sort of culminate all that. Oh, and I think I remember it now. I also think about the ways that we live in a very heteronormative society, expecting the two-parent household, the mom and the dad. And I think about the ways that for Black folks, for so many reasons, that's not been possible, and the ways in the home parents take on numerous gender roles. It is a binary, but parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles take on various gender roles in in child rearing and taking care of the family and the home um, in Black communities here in the U.S. And I'll just say that because that's what I have the most knowledge about. Um, so yeah, for all of those reasons, I think that the Black body has been gendered and ungendered um, numerous times throughout history, uh, almost all without the consent of the African subject. And so those reasons kind of lead me to believe that living Black is a kind of it's a gender experience that's maybe more dependent on the the time and the place that you're living, more than it is a choice.
So, um, speaking for yourself, going on to so relating to gender, uh, pronouns is something that has been a big thing lately, and using people's correct pronouns. You go by they and also him, right?
Mhm.
Can you share why you've chosen to use both? And do you have a preference for one more than the other?
Um, I went back and forth for a while on my pronouns when I first came out as non-binary. I've decided they, he, they, them, theirs, he, him, his, because um, yes, I would prefer to be referred to as they, them, theirs. I also feel like he, him, his. Uh, it is still a descriptor of me. Um, if that makes sense. Uh, yeah, it's not that he, him, his is untrue to me, but I do prefer they, them, theirs.
Okay. So if I'm understanding, then would you say it's more so in terms of your gender identity, it's not so much that you don't identify with what it means to be a man, quote unquote, but that there's more to it that you identify with than just the traditional normative role that we see in society of men. Would that be
Yes.
okay? That makes sense. Yeah. Um, so, can you share with us some of your experiences or moments that have been instrumental in shaping your understanding of being non-binary?
Um. Ooh. Ooh. Honestly, I think for me, one thing that was really important for me was like changing my wardrobe. There was a point in my life where I started to shop in both gendered sections of stores, of like thrift stores or wherever I was at. Um, and that was a really affirming time in my life. And now my closet has, you know, it's a mixture of clothes from both of those sides, right? But yeah, it feels like a simple thing, but it brought me so much joy to feel like, oh, I have agency and choice, and like I can dress in a way that like I feel good about, um, and that was really important for me. I think. Um, uh, some other moments. I think I read some work by a writer named Hunter Shackelford, um, and they are, yeah, just a really fierce theorist and writer. And reading their work really made me feel a lot better about what it meant for me to be non-binary, especially as a Black person. And they were talking a lot about uh, that intersection for them. Um, and I read that for the first time, I want to say about 2018 or 2019. Yeah, that was great. And I think what continues to be really instrumental is just the support I get from, um, the people in my life who use my pronouns and um, use other people's pronouns. Um, and yeah, just are, they show up. And that always makes me feel, safer. It makes me feel like I can show up too.
Okay. Um, let's see. Can okay, my next question was related to um, the other part of your queer identity. You also identify as bisexual as well.
Mhm.
Um, and so I was wondering, can you share how you discovered that part of your identity, and was it before or after you realized you were non-binary?
Mhm. I knew I was bisexual from a very early age. I felt very confident in that around age 14. Um, okay, very confident, maybe not, but I knew for sure, and I did not have a lot of shame about being attracted to both um, men and women. Um, then, the world kind of hit me as a young person. And I was told by numerous, adults in my life, like, oh, bisexuality is like not real, it's a phase, like this and that. And that really sent me spiraling from age 14 to, like, I don't know, age 25 maybe, about my sexual identity. Um, yes, it was very, very traumatic, to be told that by so many adults who I trusted. So I've known, despite that, I still knew, that I was bisexual. I think what I mean is that I started to develop a deep shame about that, um, to internalize that. So I feel like I knew I was bisexual before I knew, that I was non-binary. Is actually, a conversation. I was referring to this earlier. I was having a conversation with someone, and they about my bisexual identity. I was actually talking about whether or not I felt pansexual, and they would said to me that the things I was describing actually felt more related to gender, than my sexuality, and that sort of led me to discover non-binariness. Um, but I guess for, you know being a bi boy, um, it's something that I've learned to love about myself and accept about myself, and I'm very confident and happy about who I am now. But yeah, definitely as a young person, teenage person, it was rough for me. I had a really hard time, accepting myself, and I felt like I didn't get acceptance externally.
Now, you mentioned wondering if you might be pan, maybe. Um, can you share like why you identify with uh, bisexual over or versus pansexual?
Yeah. Um, I feel that my attraction is not necessarily, um, maybe I should try to describe it. So I feel like the the humans I'm attracted to are kind of, or seem to usually have this, very similar gender presentation, but that's sort of the only, similarity. And so I feel that bisexual describes me better, because of that reason, if that makes sense.
P- I'm just sorry, I lost my train of thought as well. Um, so you're saying because it was. Can you repeat that last part you said? I was thinking something and I lost where I was going with it.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Um, the people I'm attracted to usually have, a, a very similar gender presentation.
Right.
Um, and that is the most consistent thing, I would say, amongst the people I'm attracted to. And
Mm,
for that reason, I feel like bi
okay.
fits me better.
Okay. Um, so then, what would you say, or how do you think of um, pansexuality then? If you,
Yeah. I think of pansexuality as being a type of attraction that is, um, much, for lack of better word, freer amongst like what the person is capable and sort of like desiring for their attractions. I don't feel like my own attraction is as wide, I think is maybe the right word. And that is why I identify as bi.
Okay. Yeah. I just asked to clarify, and because within the LGBTQ plus community, you'll have people identify as bi or pan, and sometimes, depending on who you speak into, um, the definitions they give for those can overlap and look the same, and for others, it's like very different. So I always like to get clarification.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It's definitely a conversation I expected, you know. Um, and yeah, the bi pan wars, so to speak, are very interesting to see at least take place in digital spaces. You know, a lot of just a lot of uh, discussion and sometimes a lot of conflict on those, or mostly, I think bisexuality as a concept. Um, but yeah, it's a big world.
Um, so I was going to ask, where I know you mentioned one resource earlier in another question, um, but were there any other helpful resources that you used that helped in shaping and helping you understand and embrace your different identities?
um, I definitely did a lot of journaling about my me, about how I felt, about how I wanted to feel, or how I wanted to be, excuse me, how I wanted to be perceived, um, and all of those things. So that was important for my journey. Um, I feel that I read texts examining masculinity. Um, I mean, this is a very, very ubiquitous text at this point, but The Will to Change by Bell Hooks. Um, I was something I read at three different points in my life. And it's not admittedly a very like gender forward text. It operates in a very um, binary sort of way, but I think it does a really good job of debunking patriarchal masculinity, um, and helping me understand uh, what, or at least beginning to question, um, if what else is masculinity, what else is femininity, what else is gender. Um, so that helped me start to take apart the the pieces and break out of the matrix. Um, Other things that were helpful. I mean, as in the world of poetry, reading Danez Smith was has been very helpful in um, just affirming for me to see what's possible for someone when they really begin to take charge of imagining themselves. Um, yeah.
Okay. Um, Now you mentioned Anas Smith. You said their
Mm.
name. So I don't think I've heard of them before, but are they non-binary or a queer poet?
Both. Yeah.
Okay.
Danez Smith is a really incredible poet from St. Paul, I believe. Um, and yes, I've had the pleasure of meeting Danez when I was a young person. I'm still sometimes in touch with them. But yeah, they're a poet. They've authored many books. Don't Call Us Dead, Homie, Insert Boy, Black Movie. Uh, yeah, I credit Danez for a lot of, just mentorship, I think, from afar.
Okay. Um, well, that brought me to my next question, which was, who are some non-binary artists or writers that have inspired you? So are there any other ones?
Yeah, another inspiration to me has been Akwaeke Emezi. They really dabble in all the genres. They do fiction, nonfiction, poetry, music. That's
What,
really
what was their name? You said Quickie?
Akwaeke Emezi.
Akwaeke Emezi.
Yeah,
Okay.
um, yeah, they're really cool. There's a musician, Dua Saleh, who I think is maybe also from Minnesota. I think maybe from Minneapolis. They're really cool. They are a songwriter, singer. They also act. Although I've never seen the TV show that they're on, but I know that they act too. Um, they're really cool. I wrote down some names in preparation for
Mhm.
this question. So let me make sure I get everyone that I wrote down.
Okay.
Um, oh yes, someone else who I've not read a lot of their work, but I just root for from afar is River Solomon. Um,
Oh, yeah. Our book club, the one I'm in with a couple other friends, Diversity is Lit. We read one of River Solomon's books last year, um, last August, July, for Disability Pride Month. We read, what, what was the book name? I'm forgetting the name of it now, but it was a like sci-fi dystopian type of book, um, with an autistic main character, um, which we haven't read much of. Um, yeah, I can't think of the title right now. Um, but yeah, I was introduced to their work through our book club, so that was cool.
yeah, I'm a little bit familiar with The Deep, which is a really short um, um, novel that they have about uh, black mermaids, black mer people. So yeah, that piece was, I mean, that was really cool. Um, and that inspired a piece, partially inspired a piece in my own collection. Um, so yes, I have not read a lot more of Rivers, but definitely feel like super seen just off that.
Yeah.
Um, and then someone who I've been a fan of my whole life, and I did not know was non-binary until recently, is Hikaru Utada. Um, I don't know if you're like a J-pop person or like a video game person, but she did the soundtrack for this game Kingdom Hearts,
Okay.
and yeah, I'm sorry, I mean they, but yeah, they did the soundtrack, and I didn't know until recently that they had come out as non-binary, so that was really cool.
Right. And the phone reminded me, An Unkindness of Ghosts. Yes, that was the book we read by River Solomon in our club, An Unkindness of Ghosts. So thank you for reminding me. It's like, it's on the tip of my tongue, but I couldn't remember the title. Yeah. So, let's see. I was gonna ask, how do you feel about, so, since we're going to be talking about intersectionality in here and everything, how do you feel the intersections of your identities being Black, bisexual, and non-binary has shaped your experiences and your voice as a writer?
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, it definitely shapes, I think, all of my experiences. Um, and that is the main source of my writing is my lived experiences. So I think what I've had to do is figure out how to craft a voice as a writer that feels authentic to me. Again, with all of these like conceptions of like what it is to be Black, what it is to be non-binary, um, or even bisexual. Um, Trying to craft a voice and an identity for myself as a writer that, yeah, it was real and didn't feel like I was trying to play any of those up or play into any, comfortable sort of poems or comfortable themes for writers of that identity, of those identities. Um, yeah.
Um, so kind of going along with this, in your bio, you mentioned questioning the limitations of Black masculinity within your work. Uh, can you talk about that more and just how that relates to your experiences?
Yeah. Yes, I think that that is the broad, um, you know, guiding goal of my work is to push against, to question, to challenge, to bring attention to this thing, Black masculinity, and sort of along the lines of my answer earlier about non-binariness and how I connected that to being Black. Um, Black folks, uh, especially those um, living in U.S., UK, descendant of enslaved folks, not been able to determine much for ourselves historically, um, much less our own uh, gender or gender rights. Um, and with that being very much the foundation of, what it is to be Black is to um, live with histories that have been obscured and erased and destroyed, while also living with the present world asking for whatever sort of resource it's mining from Black folks at that time. Um, and amongst all of that, I feel that, Black masculinity is very much a a designed patriarchal role for Black men to help a patriarchy that's not going to help them. And of course, there are examples, numerous, too many to count, of Black folks who, you know, are masculine, would identify that way, who, resist and challenge and live outside of this very violent, very prescribed performance of gender for the Black body. But for the most part, we expect the uh, the manufactured idea of Black masculinity, the hypersexual, the hyperviolent, and the very likely to um, fall into the criminal system sort of Black masculinity. That is what the U.S. profits from heavily, from Black people believing that about themselves. Um,
So basically, all the stereotypes you would see in TV and the media. Yeah.
yes, and those stereotypes are heavily tied to reality. Like the idea of the Black thug stereotype is very evil when we think about the conditions that have created so-called crime in Black communities. Um, it's really unfair to cast this image of Black men being criminals when um, they did not create the poverty-stricken conditions that they've lived in, and that their grandparents lived in, and that their grandparents and their grandparents lived in. Um, and yeah, I guess in so many ways, the function of gender really is capitalistic. Um, and I'm interested in specifically the function of gender for Black bodies, um, which is also capitalistic, right? Because you know who profits the most off of propagating that Black men are criminals? The prison and industrial complex, and that's $1 billion industry, right? So it's yeah. I think I just wanted to definitely go into like the very real material um, consequences of this kind of like gender binary, um, and definitely not sure how much I related it back to my own experiences, but I think like it goes to say that like I am Black and masculine, and uh, have experienced numerous violences in my life that I have to process with through those lenses, and those are all in my work. And even the things that I'm talking about now that are maybe huge structural things, those are also still violences against me and folks like me, um, and part of my experience in some way, and come back into the work.
Okay. Well, um, so in speaking of that, what challenges do you think you face due to your identities, both um, personally and or as a writer and artist, and how have you navigated those challenges?
Mm. Yeah, I think it's really hard for Black um, authors or writers in general. Um, there's a lot of pigeonholing, and there's a lot of policing, and then there's also like a lot of pedestaling for reasons of for political reasons, right? Someone's work not talking about XYZ, or someone's work talking about XYZ in this way, and someone else's work talks about it in this way. Um, and I think that's just because, I mean, yeah, we live in a time. I mean, it's never not a like politically contentious, like racially charged period. Um, this thing of race, as much as America has tried to, at times ignore it, and then at other times like lean back into it. It is a very much an unresolved wound upon the country, and so I think that Black authors, Black writers, their work gets viewed in very unfair lenses, oftentimes, um, and so I don't know how much that can be done about that, without big systemic changes. It is just something that Black writers and artists create through, and oftentimes create about. Um,
You so earlier when you were mentioning the how Black masculinity limits us, and the portrayal of like Black men as criminals and who benefits from that and everything. Do you think within within the publishing industry and even music industry, do you think there's a that Black writers in particular are sort of pushed into writing uh, a certain type of story or poem or song lyrics, like more they're not given the freedom to explore different types of stories that they could possibly tell versus their counterparts, or I guess what do you think about that?
yes, I definitely feel that there are accepted presentations for Black artists, accepted tones and messages, accepted content, and I guess I just mean by uh, the masses, the consumers, but also the gatekeepers, the publishing houses, the record labels, all of that. Um, yeah, they the things that usually if we're talking about industry wise, the things that usually sell the most from Black writers and artists um, fall into or share a lot of the same uh, tropes or narratives or ideas or images, or there's a sort of like champion. There's like a Black artist writer champion of a genre or of an art form for many many years, who holds a lot of prestige. There's a lot of different ways that the othering and the exclusion operates. Um, in my own life, it's been um, a, a lot of folks not knowing what to do with my work because it is as much as um, a form poem as much as it is you know a rap verse, um, and a lot of disconnect between people in the audience listening or reading who might not understand or know or value hip hop as art um, enough to be able to like I guess arrive to the same place after or during my work, um, and so that's been frustrating, uh, and also frustrating to feel that I have to choose um, between different industries and markets and all of these things.
Mhm.
That also feels frustrating to me as an artist, but um, yeah, I just try my best to create through it, and understand again that I didn't create any of these things, and um, I cannot control how people respond to what I make. I can just make it.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I I asked that. I go into that because I've uh, heard writers, some writers, that have been saying, a lot of these stories and narratives we see from Black writers and even other writers of color is so focused on the trauma versus the joy and happiness and stuff and the magic and wonder. And that's what people want to bring more into versus just stories about trauma, which I totally agree. And, one of the reasons why I loved um, another book that we did in our book club was Black Boy Joy. And it's a collection of short stories. And I think there was one poem in there as well. But I just love seeing all of these, happy, positive stories and nothing to do with trauma or pain. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, there's a lot of profit off of our trauma,
Mhm,
unfortunately. Um,
mhm,
a lot of exploitation off of our trauma. Yeah, I totally hear that.
yeah. Um, thank you, Dr. Fun. Um, so let's see, my other question here was, so speaking of your book, your debut, 808s and Other Worlds, Memories, Remixes, and Mythologies, what was for you the most challenging part of writing that, and what was the most rewarding part?
Yeah. So for me, the most challenging part was having the patience and the self determination. Um, that book is really it's like, it's really a 6 year effort, because there's things in the book that at the time it was published had been written 6 years ago. Um, but I would say for 4 years, I was consciously working on a manuscript. I was drafting a manuscript for 4 years. And yeah, I got really frustrated with the rejections and the lack of resources. And I was definitely about to just self publish it. I was really down to do that. And I was very excited when I heard back from a publisher, and we were able to move forward. So that process, so many times, I did feel like I was done. I was like, okay, well, this book's never going to come out. And I was like, okay, maybe it will. And I was like, no. And then I was like, okay, it will. I'm just going to do it myself. And it almost felt like I had to get to that point, you know, um, for anything to happen. I had to get to that point of like, I'm doing it. I know who and why I'm doing it for. And so I do feel blessed that it was able to reach larger audiences and more people across the world because of um, a publishing house.
Yeah, that's awesome. Um, so, what advice then would you give to young writers that with similar or with intersectional identities who are just starting out? Like, what would you say to them?
I would definitely say follow your instincts. It's actually really difficult to do that as an artist. I feel like we are so often, inundated with other people's art and other people's opinions on other art and our art and all these ideas of what a short story should be, a novel, a song, whatever. But no, truly, like, follow your heart, and what feels good in your process is important to you, and you should keep it. Um, what feels good in your art, what brings you joy in your own process, your own art, is important to it, and you should keep it. Um, I remember feeling so often that it's so silly to say out loud, but it's actually a really serious thing amongst, at least poets trained in academia, is like to not write rhyming poems unless you're using a rhyming form. Um, and that was such a weird thing for me as a young writer, so heavily influenced by rap music, right? Um, to hear that in college classrooms, and then also to have heard that a lot in the slam poetry culture, which is a lot more of like a monologue style more than like a rhymed delivery. Um, so yeah, it seems so silly, but like I really did start to feel like as a poet, I was like, oh, good poems don't rhyme, right? And like that was really unfortunate because that's one of my favorite parts of writing poems is like rhyming. um, so yeah, like it doesn't really matter what anyone else says. If it feels good to you, keep it.
Yeah, I like that. Um, I've done some poetry and spoken word, but I'm not great at rhyming. So most of mine don't rhyme, but there are some that have a rhythm and form to it that almost makes it like a rhyme.
Yeah, and rhymed or unrhymed, it's a poem.
Yeah.
Um, I I really don't understand why, specifically, academia is so against rhymed poems. It's a very strange, snobby thing that I've noticed, um, about. I guess one of many strange, snobby things I've noticed about academia. But I do have a bachelor's in creative writing. I don't have an MFA, and I don't know 100% if I will, but definitely just from my undergrad, I was like, oh,
I
interesting.
I wonder if that's I kind of wonder if part of that is because of like nursery rhymes that you hear as kids. And so people think of rhymes, they think sort of like nursery rhymes and think, oh, that's childish or whatever. And so uh, I wonder if maybe that has anything to do why academia would look down on poems that rhyme. Um, that's the only thing that kind of comes to my mind of why.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I feel like maybe I've heard folks talk about it before, but I guess also for me as someone who enjoys that specifically, it just really doesn't make sense to me. Um,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, let's see here. So, how how do you hope that your work would impact readers, especially those that are struggling or grappling with their own identities?
Yeah, I mean, so much of 808s and Other Worlds is just like me naming, reclaiming myself, my body. Um, so I hope that it can serve as some kind of, um, uh, inspiration or affirmation, um, that it's possible to, we all have the autonomy to self-determine, to be who we feel we are, um, without having to hide that for fear of shame and violence. And I do understand, for depending on who we're talking about, the levels of violence are different, right? um, I definitely understand that. But I remember one time, I read a poem. The last poem in the book is called "What It's Like to Be a Suburban Black Demi Boy," and it's based on a Patricia Smith poem. She's like an incredible poet, and her poem is titled "What It's Like to Be a Black Girl for Those Who Aren't." Um, and I read my poem at it was an open mic. It was like a combination open mic drag show. And I read my poem, and someone came up to me afterward, and they were like, "I literally like the part in your poem when you were talking about trying on like makeup in your dad's bathroom. Like I literally also did that same thing." And that was like a moment for me of like, yeah, just knowing that I shared something really intimate from my life, and it helped someone else feel very seen. Um, so I know that not everyone's going to be able to like maybe literally see parts of their lived experience, but I hope that people feel like they feel more seen.
Hmm. That's the great thing about stories that I love is like being able to um, not just escape into this adventurous fantasy world, which is great, but also being able to connect with the characters where you're like, oh, that's just like me. I do the same thing, and being seen, like you said, um, is so powerful. And I think that's the great thing about telling stories.
Yeah.
Um, so I just have a couple questions left, and then we'll get to the Q&A question or session. So for those that are here watching, if you have any questions that you want to ask Sean, drop them in the comment box, and I'll get to them during the Q&A session. But I just have a few more here. Um, what do you think? What should writers know when it comes to writing non binary and bisexual characters, particularly ones that are Black?
Um, I think it's really important to understand how deeply racial identity shapes um, the experience and expression of sexuality and gender. Um, it's really deep on very deep cultural levels. Um, yeah, on familial levels. Uh, you know, uh, layers of religion, depending on what racial identity we're talking about, and where they're situated, and geologically, and or geographically. Um, and so there's just so much nuance, I think, is what I'm trying to say, for all of these identities. So thinking about them all in one, is, yeah, just a lot of care to think really deeply about all these interconnecting forces that shape how we identify and how we present, what we show the world, what we hide the world, um, how we experience the world. Um, so I think that's definitely something I would say. I would also say, of course, like there are. Maybe this is your next question. Is your next question about things they should avoid?
Yes. So, yeah, the next one was what stereotypes or harmful tropes do you think they should be aware of?
Um, yeah, so in addition to taking the utmost care and thinking a lot about the character and who they are and where they are, why they are, um, there's definitely, if we're talking about Black characters who are Black and intersectional, um, there are a lot of stereotypes, a lot. And there are also a lot of stereotypes for queer characters. Sometimes depending on the specific queer identifier. And then there are also more general tropes for queer characters. So um, there's a lot of things to avoid, the Black deviant, like the Black sexual deviant is like a stereotype. And that's also like a queer stereotype for characters, right? Um, it's also
I was gonna say, especially for bisexual, isn't it? Um, that's one that I hear a lot as a misconception for bisexual is that um, not just the deviant, but also the uh, greedy, just wants to be with everyone.
Yeah, it's a very deep stereotype in our society, and it does show up in a lot of our media and our art. Um, uh, Definitely for bisexual people, um, men, women, non-binary, um, across gender as well. Um, or I guess I mean across trans and cisgender as well. Um, Another stereotype that I think about often is like the Black mystic character,
Mhm.
um, which could also just be the BIPOC mystic. Right? It's not always Black, but thinking about my own identities, I'll speak to the Black mystic. But yeah, that's really common. That's super common, and I think also once we start talking about all these other intersectional identities, right? Like it can become easier for an author or whatever you're writing, screenwriter, whatever, um, to write a Black non-binary, mystic character who somehow has all the knowledge and shows up and knows exactly what to do and has little to no backstory and mostly serves as a sidekick, right? Like all these things. That's definitely a trope I see very, very often and very tired of. And one last thing that I wrote down too. This one is very nuanced, and I think that like I do really think that like Black people should try and write this kind of Black character, but um, something that I write about in my own experience a lot is internalized self hatred. That's something that I feel like is very real for Black people. Again, because of the ways we've been oppressed and then our history is erased and replaced with all this propaganda about us, right? There's a lot to be not happy about. There's a lot to feel bad about. And without, um, strong community support, without the resources and capabilities to ask questions and to learn and to try things and travel, right? There's so many things I think that can help combat self-hatred within Black folks.
Mhm.
And I think writing a self-hating Black character is something I see a lot now, especially with like the Black biracial character. Um, Maybe not always being written by Black people, right? And I think that's a really heavily nuanced experience
Yeah.
that should be, and that's a very specific traumatic part of that experience,
Mhm.
um, and specifically internalized self-loathing, and that should be probably handled by someone who is Black.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Well, it's um, you get into what I've talked about before. I actually have a video on this topic, which I'll link below when we're done. But the whole, uh, when it comes to writing stories, knowing what stories are yours to tell and what are not, and the difference between writing a diverse character versus writing an own voices type of story. Um, and, that's, I want to help writers to learn how to write diverse characters. So I think we all benefit from having different diverse cast of characters in our stories, but just knowing the difference and knowing that some stories, are not, um, are just not yours to tell. Uh, Mainly because there's so much nuance, like you said. There's so much nuance to it, and there's so many ways you can go wrong and mess it up if you don't have that personal lived experience. Um, and so, knowing the difference, uh, I kind of go into explaining the difference and talking about that in that video. So, I'll link it below for those watching. Um, but that's a good point that you bring up.
Yeah, thank you. It's really cool that you have like a whole video on that.
It's I did it a few years ago, so I probably should maybe update it and you know do a new one on it. Um, so my let's see. So I've my last two questions. And again, for those watching, if you have questions, leave them in the chat box, and we'll get to them during the Q&A in just a few minutes. But my last, well, I have two more. The next one was, are there any resources you would suggest for writers wanting to learn more about non-binary or intersectional characters, to portray them well and accurately in their stories?
um, that is a good question. Um, hmm. I would say may it's tough. I don't know if I can name any specific resources for folks, as in like you should read this or
Mhm.
listen to this.
Mhm.
I think maybe more what I can suggest is um, wow, I don't know if I can.
Maybe just read from authors and writers that have those identities and see how they uh, write their stories.
Yeah, I mean, we did talk about um, River Solomon earlier.
Mhm.
We also I brought up Akwaeke Emezi. Those are both non-binary authors who write all a whole host of characters, um, and yeah, I think that like um, I think maybe what stumped me is that I can't think of stories with non-binary main characters or the sort. I can't think of anything like that sort of off the top, and so I felt really stumped. But
Right.
yeah,
That's that's a good point, and it's one that you know like should try to. I think that's why these voices need to be heard and need to be brought up, because when you said that, I'm like thinking, and I'm like, yeah, I can't think of a story with a non-binary main character. There are a couple stories I've read with trans main characters,
hmm
but a non-binary one, and there's some stories with non-binary side characters that I've read, but not a non-binary main characters. Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
do you need more of those? Oh, but also I was also gonna say, um, as far as resources go, another one that I like to share with folks is I think it's Salt and Sage Publishing, I think is the name of the publisher who publishes these books. But one of their books is called How to Write Black Characters. And
Mm,
that one goes into all the different stereotypes and tropes to stay away from. The one you brought up, the mystic one, um, it's called the magical Negro in their book.
yes.
Um, so they have the magical Negro, they have the Jezebel one, like the deviant one you were talking about.
Hmm.
Um, so different stereotypes and tropes they cover in that book of what to stay away from, what to learn from, and like it goes into different topics in within Black culture as well. So the importance of our hair and what that means to people in the community, um, and different things like that. So that's a resource that I always suggest to writers that are writing Black characters that are not Black themselves. And they have other books in that series as well of writing different diverse characters. Um, I don't remember if they have. Um, I don't remember which of the queer books in that series they've done so far. I think one was on demisexual,
Hmm.
and I can't remember if there was another. Um, but they have several of those books, and they continue to do more. So um, yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah, they're a good resource. I think so. I'll also for the resources that we talk about. Um, when I get a chance, I will link all of those in the description box below for anyone um, who watches the replay. I'll have them linked down below. So, my last question is just is there anything else that you'd like to share about your experience that, as a writer, that we haven't covered yet?
Um, I do just want to give a shout out to some more writers who are really inspirational to me.
Yeah.
N.K. Jemisin,
Oh, yes.
yes, yes, she's the truth. Um, Reading her books, specifically the Broken Earth trilogy and the Dream Blood duology, was really cool because I got to see Black queer characters, and they just felt real, and they were also in sci-fi and fantasy worlds, and it just really, I was like, oh, it's possible. Like I'm reading this book in which someone has written it in such a captivating and original way, and yeah, like it can be done. I can do it. Other people can do it. Like it was a really celebratory moment for me to read those two series from her. And also in a similar vein, I feel the same way about Octavia Butler,
Oh,
um,
yeah.
and specifically her. For me, what I really love from her is her patternist series, um, and I don't know if this is like linked to like anything about me and as a writer related to my identity, but to see her as a science fiction writer chronicle, like hundreds of years in one series, and really like complete this timeline and like just I don't know, just the scale and the scope and the size of the Patternist series, and also a lot of its themes, how much it still relates so closely to the experiences of Africans and the histories of bondage. Um, I feel like it was really just chef's kiss and really inspired me to be like, okay, like writing on a huge scale, cross time in this big way, fictional and non-fictional is like really possible. There's ways to do that with craft still.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to say that.
Awesome. And I'm glad you said that because that also reminded me of another resource um, for anyone watching. For anyone who has the masterclass subscription, it's a yearly subscription. But if you do have it, I would highly recommend NK Jemisin's course on masterclass. She teaches on writing sci-fi and fantasy, and her course is absolutely great. So, highly recommend that one if you have masterclass. Um, and then I see we have a question from Devi Phone says, can you spell out the name of the author besides Rivers Solomon? Which can you do you know which
Yeah,
author?
yeah. So for Rivers Solomon, it's Rivers plural, and
Mhm.
then it's spelled Solomon. So Solomon.
Mon.
Yes. And then Akwaeke Emezi is spelled Akwaeke space capital Emezi.
Okay, so AKWAEKE space EMEZI.
Yeah.
Okay, so I am putting both of those in the chat box right now, um, so folks can see how it's spelled.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Um,
That's my cousin.
I think you just got a new nickname.
I think that's one of my family members.
Okay,
Yeah.
nice. Um, so if anyone watching, if you have any other questions, leave them in the chat box. Otherwise, we will start to wrap this up. Um, well, thank you, Phone, for joining us live today as well. Thank you for being here. And for everyone who joined us live, I hope this was very informational and you got a lot out of it, took a lot from it. Um, so, do you have any final thoughts or words you want to share, Sean?
I just want to thank you again for having me. Thanks for talking with me today. I had a lot of fun. And yeah, if anyone's listening and you want to write, do it.
Oh, awesome. Well, thank you for being here with me today and joining me live for this. Um, I really have been wanting to uh, find more people with from marginalized identities that I haven't covered yet. And non-binary was one that I was really excited to cover. So thank you for joining me and being here today. Um, if you guys want to follow Sean or check out his new debut, here it is again, 808s and At the Worlds, Memories, Remixes, and Mythologies. Um, so if you want to check out his debut, uh, follow him. All his links are down in the description box below. And I'll be adding some of those resources that we've talked about in the description box later on as well. So that is it for today. If you guys enjoyed this video and would like to support my channel, consider donating at the link below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video with others. Thanks everyone for joining us today. And I will be back next month. Thank you, Debbie Phone. I'll be back next month with another interview where we'll be talking about blind characters. So that's another one I haven't done yet. So come back and join us for that. So that's it for today. Bye, everyone.
Bye.